solutions to these particular issues. Now, in relation to how islanders would characterise themselves and their relationship with the mainland, one of the themes that keeps coming again and again is the idea of Ireland and the islands as different places. And it brings me back to where we started in relation to how they might be characterised and how they characterised themselves. I mentioned the Irish Folklore Commission. Rose McCurdy, who was a native of Rathlin Island, gave an interesting interview to one of the commissioners in the 1950s. And she referred to those on the mainland as the Irish people. And she said her family had always referred to the mainlanders as the Irish people, suggesting, of course, that the islanders were not Irish people, they were island people, a very crucial distinction. And that's reflected in the idea of going out to the mainland as opposed to going in to the mainland, which illuminates that sense of place, of course, that the islanders have. You can also see in another one of Peadar O'Donnell's novels, Proud Island, which was published in the 1970s, a character, Mary Jim, asking this question: what have we to do with Ireland? What notice did Ireland ever take of us? And that remained, of course, a bone of contention. Tarek de Blackham wrote interestingly in the 1970s about the need to educate the mainlanders out of the banishment syndrome. But some felt the islanders also needed to be educated out of that syndrome. The way de Blackham put it in the 1970s, you can have as full a life as you can elsewhere on an island, perhaps even a fuller life. And of course, trying to bring meaning to that in the decades since has involved all sorts of projects for reinvention, of trying to come up with new ways to sustain island life. And of course, in recent times, all the other challenges that come with technology and whether or not islands will have access to the internet. Opportunities for them to market themselves as ideal tourist destinations. Natural resources, obviously, are plenty on the islands. The wildlife of the islands, which is such a draw for so many visitors. But you will still find that islands come into the news for the same reasons that they always did. It's often tragedy, it's often access, it's often controversy over education and schooling. And for all of the improvements and the modernisation, if you cannot sustain island after primary schooling, island living after primary schooling, what is going to become of the island? And these controversies are ones that we often read about in the modern era. They do come into current affairs for mainlanders as a result of a lot of those difficulties. But also, of course, the unique way of life and the extent to which they do represent such an important continuity with an ancient past. And then those, of course, who have been very successful in marketing the produce of the islands. You can buy, for example, an Aran storm jacket for $520 at the Bergdorf Goodman in New York, I discovered a couple of months ago. But there's also the issue of gentrification of the islands. Are native islanders priced out of the islands because of island houses as prizes for those on the mainland? This is an issue in various parts of the country on various islands. And there's also those who have found creative havens on the islands. Musicians, artists, writers. The way one musician on a Cork island put it, islanders let you stand in your own space. That's a lovely tribute to islanders and to island living. And there are others, of course, who want to use islanders as fitness centres, or in order to recover, or to stage festivals, or indeed as sites for civil wedding ceremonies, other reflections, I suppose, of early 21st century priorities. I have to mention Donald Trump, I'm afraid. I don't know if you can give a lecture anymore without mentioning Donald Trump. But I was intrigued in 2016 to discover that Inishturk, which it was stated had a population of 58, had become a viral sensation. Because Mary Heaney, the development officer for Inishturk, invited Americans who were horrified at the prospect of a Donald Trump presidency to settle themselves on Inishturk. And there was a video made, "Make Inishturk Great Again." Fair play to Mary. I don't know how many actually took up that particular offer. But I would bring that to a close by highlighting the extent to which there is still an idea of the islands as representing the soul of Ireland. What might irritate those who live on islands in relation to that is that there is still such a gulf between the life and the literature. And of course, it was always thus. But when it comes to the island as home, only islanders can communicate effectively what the essence of island life is. There are many who have tried to encapsulate the essence of island life who have concluded that only islanders can do that in a genuine and authentic way. I don't think the history of islands is just one of bleakness and tragedy. There are, according to the last census, just under 9,000 people populating the offshore islands. The recent fall in population has been modest enough to suggest that there is a future for the islands. But you have to be conscious in thinking about the contemporary needs of islands, how the history of islands has fared. Thank you very much.